It seems to me that, when you're talking about the Global Futures Laboratory and then Lightworks, that they're almost entwined to some extent, that you want that renewable energy if you're really going to make a difference in our energy system on that global scale, because our future depends on it. But I'm really curious about the social aspect and the cultural, because that, I feel people need to be able to buy into the change in the system that we want to create for the future that we want to create. And so how does solar energy, when you bring it to a community, how have you seen that impact a community?
That's a really good question, and I really support the premise, meaning that this change at any scale, and I was just describing it at the global scale, but the change in the energy system is everything from how do you personally use energy to how does your community do it, to how does your state, your region. It's the full spectrum of the scale that we have to think about. At the community level, it depends very much, frankly, on where you are. In my previous life, I worked in Papua New Guinea, for example. Papua, not Papua Guinea, Papua. And as part of the work that I was doing there, we put in solar energy, and we put in a microgrid, and we had batteries and a diesel generator, so a little microgrid. And what I was fascinated by is how wrong we were in thinking about what this village wanted to do. As I was imagining students studying at night, which they did, by the way, but what I hadn't envisaged, perhaps naively, is satellite television, cell phones, boom boxes, the kinds of things that everybody else wants.
Exactly.
That these people could never have had before. And so number one, you completely changed the way in which that group of people were able to interact with the world and all of the world, because
Right.
now they're connected through satellite to the whole planet. The other thing that was really interesting is that now the young people who could maintain this system had a massive change in their status in the community hierarchy.
Oh.
So now all of a sudden there was a generational shift in how people participated in the life of the community. Now that's at one end of the spectrum. These are remote villages in a place that didn't have energy before. I think it's fascinating to look in my own community where I live at the way in which people are using solar energy, how they're thinking about using it in their home, how they decide to make investments, on what basis they decide to invest and put solar in. And then, of course, at higher scales, there's an amazing debate going on in most of the states of the United States around the energy future for those states. And that is primarily the result of solar energy getting cheaper, batteries getting cheaper, electric vehicles becoming more cost competitive and more interesting to consumers. And that's changing dramatically the way in which we think about our lives and we think about the way in which we use energy. So it is a very profound shift, primarily a social shift.
And I think what you're talking about, the social shift, is the most interesting part, because sometimes we think that you just bring the technology in, but you really have to think about the social aspect of the change that is occurring. And it's so hard to predict that ripple effect that's going to come with that.
It really is, although what I would say about that is too often and for too long, there's been a tendency for there to be something of a resonance between business and a certain kind of economic thinking and technology that has had a tendency to push innovation purely along a technical dimension. And so we've tended to fall into a way of thinking and behaving where technological change happens and social change then has to kind of adapt to that. What I think we need to be much more forthright about is the importance of having the involvement, and in fact the leadership, coming from humanities and social scientists, thinking about these big transitions that I alluded to earlier, and have them helping us understand what the big parameters are, the value systems, the morality associated with different choices. Having that as the core, and then we build around it technological change, business models that might be innovative in some sense, the economics, so that at the core is a sense of who it is we are and what we want to be, as opposed to trying to bolt that on when the technology is set, the businesses are up and operating. And in other words, I think traditionally we've kind of had this turned on its head.
I can't agree more.